Hi everyone. Today we'll be talking about something that impacts us all pretty much every day, and that's the weather. And joining me is Dr. Andrew Tupper from Natural Hazards Consulting, who also happens to be a meteorologist. Welcome Andrew, it's so great to have you.
Great to be here, Mel. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. Andrew, tell us a little bit about your business.
So I've had my career so far really being around all kinds of wild weather, natural hazards in general, and just general weather and climate issues. And the business is really about helping people find solutions to problems in that space, because there are a whole lot of weather and climate and hazards things to deal with in life.
That's absolutely right, Andrew. And everybody, of course, including myself, just love talking about the weather. Which brings us to our Weird Weather Questions segment, where I'm going to throw you some questions about the weather and hopefully you'll be able to provide some clarity.
Sure, hit me.
Okay, Andrew. Now, firstly, basically, how is a weather forecast put together?
Well, okay, really briefly, you take as many observations as you can of the atmosphere and the oceans and everything in the whole world, which is not simple, but that's another story. You share that information with everyone else who is doing the same job around the world. You put it all into, basically the fastest computers that you can get access to. You use physics to calculate what will happen next. You share all those results, and then you work out the best way to tell the users, the people who actually need the weather forecasts, the complexities of everything that's going on to help them plan their lives.
How far ahead can we predict the weather?
Look, when I was a little boy, which was a little while ago now, realistically it was only 1 or 2 days. But these days, we've got good confidence in 7-day forecasts most of the time. The weather agencies around the world actually track all that internally and keep the stats, and the stats keep going up. Weather forecasts are improving. But along with that sort of 1 week or a bit more window, we actually have a good handle now on what the season ahead might be like. Not what it's going to be every day, but what it's likely to be based on the patterns that are around in the ocean, on the land, in the atmosphere. And then, even out to 4 or more months ahead, you can have a pretty good guess at how something's going to play out.
Now, I was a weather presenter, as you know, for many, many years, and I can't tell you the number of people who would ring me and say, I've got a wedding in 8 months. Can I please have a forecast for it? And of course, couldn't provide that level of detail. Where are we at with that? Are we ever going to be able to look a year ahead, say, for a particular event?
Okay, I actually love the wedding question, Mel, because it's got so many aspects to it. So the quick answer is no, we can't tell you what it's going to be at, say, 2 p.m. on the 12th of September or whenever. But the other part of the answer is that we can tell you a lot about how to plan for that day. So let's start with the really long range. Let's say it is a year away or even 18 months away. You still know what the climate is like at the location you're going to have that wedding. So you look that up, you find out, well, normally it's fine, but it could be a bit showery. Sometimes it gets really cold, sometimes it gets really hot. And so those are your basic parameters. And then you think about, well, do I book a wet weather venue? And let's say you're planning it in Melbourne and it's spring. You would probably think about a wet weather venue. But if you're going to have it in Darwin in September, you probably wouldn't. Instead, you'd be thinking, well, we're going to be flying Auntie Flo up from Adelaide for the wedding. How are we going to keep her cool and happy? Because she's going to be landing in a climate that she knows nothing about. So you think about all those things without actually knowing what the weather is actually going to be doing. And then a few months out, you would look again and go, well, okay, the forecast is it's probably going to be a warmer season than usual. It's probably going to be more humid if you're in Darwin in particular, or maybe a bit more rainy. So let's just kind of change the risk profile a little bit and just review our decisions. And then a few weeks out, you look again at those kind of seasonal predictions, and then you keep going with that process until you're up to that 7-day period where you can actually say, they're forecasting the cold front to come through, or that it's going to be a muggy day, or whatever, depending where you are. So you can plan your risk profile for that wedding from now. You don't have to wait until you're a few days out and start panicking about it.
Okay, it's really useful information actually, Andrew. Now, Australia is such a land of contrasts, isn't it? I mean, we've got flooding rains, droughts, bushfires, cyclones. Mother Nature seems to be quite hard on us here in Australia at times. Obviously, you deal in natural hazards, so how can we better, or how can we best handle those natural hazards, which really are an inevitable part of living in this country?
I think the most important thing to me is that we're not passive about natural hazards. For nearly every natural hazard that Australia or even the world gets, you can do some measure of forecasting. Even the ones where you can't really, let's say earthquakes, you still can get a really good handle on, are you living in a zone that's likely to get earthquakes? And so you attack that with building standards. If you're living in a cyclone zone, you think about your housing standards there too. And for most things now, we can actually forecast the likelihood that they're going to happen, the flood, the cyclone, the severe storms and so on. So if we approach things with our sort of risk envelope, and then we're aware of how things are developing, and we make good decisions about that and not just kind of wait until the day before or the hour before, we get much better outcomes. And that's about making sure that a natural hazard doesn't create a disaster, because ultimately most disasters are to do with how we respond to events rather than the events themselves.
You're also involved, and I'm going to throw this question now at you, involved with the World Meteorological Association as well. And you're talking about the importance of how that information from around the world feeds into forecasts and helps us perhaps deal with hazards here in Australia as well. Can you just explain that to people? I mean, we are an island, but we rely so heavily, don't we, on information from overseas as well?
Yeah, look, I'll say, I think it's fair to say that many of us are a little bit cynical about international processes and whether they work or not. But there are organisations like the World Meteorological Organisation, and another example might be the International Civil Aviation Organisation, that actually work for a particular job and get things done. So with aviation, with ICAO, they help planes fly without incident around the world, and normally that happens really well. In meteorology, this process of everyone sharing observations for free and collaborating on the science and organising stuff to happen across borders, that's been going on for decades as well, and it actually really works, and the results show it. It's not perfect. None of these international things are perfect, just like none of our cross-border arrangements in Australia are usually perfect. But they're an awful lot better than the alternative. So I enjoy working in that area and helping to make things better where I can.
Just wrapping up today, what's your favourite type of weather?
Look, I had to say my favourite type of weather to be in is a monsoon in the far northern tropics, if everyone's okay.
You're a long way away from that here, Andrew.
Because it's a lot more interesting than a lovely sunny day. But as long as everyone's okay, I do like seeing the wild weather. I mean, most weather nuts do. But it's where it gets hairy. It's where people's lives are at risk that you've really got to focus on getting good outcomes for people. And so then it sort of suddenly turns from pleasure to work, if that makes sense.
It does. I mean, the weather can be, it can be dangerous, let's face it. I mean, we've seen the terrible floods in Queensland and, of course, the bushfires here in Victoria. So I guess what advice would you give people, your last piece of advice for today, in regards to preparing for hazards, to be aware of those hazards? What advice would you give?
I guess the biggest bit of advice is to be weather aware. Here in Australia, we're lucky. We've got good weather forecasts. I've always say people should follow what the Bureau of Meteorology is saying, what local emergency services are saying. Don't leave it to the last minute. Prepare and take accountability for the plans that you have about what natural hazards might be around. And if you do that and respond appropriately, the odds are that you're going to be in a much better space.
That's really great advice. Thank you so much. And thank you for joining us today, Andrew. We hope to have some weird weather questions, perhaps from our viewers who might like to share those with us on social media. In the meantime, enjoy your week, and we'll see you again soon here on The Informer.